Thank you, everyone, for joining me for these live studies week after week. The entire show is an hour and a half long. It's the two topics that are broken up where we take one topic, which is an hour long, and the name of that topic is Eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. We talk about prophetic passages and themes, and it's a long, what do we call it? A long form content, if you want to call it that. I think that's the phrase I've heard thrown around. Long form means each video is not self-contained. Rather, it is an ongoing study, just like you would have in a church where a pastor's going systematically, verse by verse, through a book of the Bible, and he's just going to take months or years until he's finished. He's not in a hurry. That's kind of long form content. That's kind of what my video channel is like. I'm not into really doing just one-off videos. But, so what I'm trying to say is I hope that you watch this video and then you keep watching, keep going with the new videos I produce. But sometimes we're right in the middle of something, so you have to go back and watch previous videos, and you got to watch the new stuff. So I get it. It's difficult. You may only end up watching one or two videos that catch your interest. So do what you can and jump in where you can. It doesn't really matter where you jump in to the river. Your feet are going to get wet no matter what. So eschatology, that's the first study. The second one, which is the second topic segment, is 30 minutes long. It's apologetic. It takes Trinity versus non-Trinity, and it's entitled a biblical response to a Trinitarian response to biblical Unitarianism. And so if those are topics that interest you, stick around for the entire hour and a half long show. Okay, let's jump into the first hour segment, Eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. Like you can see on your screen right now, there are currently 18 topics to this ongoing study. We've been going for a few years now, and we're working our way towards, we're working our way towards topic, if you look on your screen, topic 15 and 16 is kind of the meat Book of Revelation study. And then after that, we're going to do these Q&A questions and answers. But we're currently in topic 12, the little yellow part, Rapture views, a final analysis. So what does that look like? Let me jump over to this chart here. The question is often asked, when will God rapture the church? There are 4 different views that are tossed around. All of these are premillennial, meaning the return of Jesus in all of these views is understood to be an event that will usher in the millennial kingdom, the 1,000-year reign of Christ on planet Earth. So we are not amillennial like some Christian outfits. All 4 of these are premillennial. And the first one is the one in the upper left corner, pre-trib rapture. They're the one that enjoys the most attention in evangelical circles. Pre-trib raptures believe the church will be raptured before this final 7-year period known as Daniel's 70th week. The second one on the list in the upper right corner is the mid-tribulation rapture. And they believe that the rapture will occur exactly halfway through the 7-year period, just before the beginning of the Great Tribulation. They still have a kind of a concept of we're not going to go through God's wrath concept, just like the pre-tribbers do. But you can see by looking and comparing the time frames, these two time frames, that the mid-tribbers are much shorter. By the way, we're going to talk about mid-tribbers tonight. Okay. The third one that gets mentioned in these studies, post-trib rapture, lower left corner. Post-tribulation rapturists believe the rapture will occur following the 7-year period known as Daniel's 7th week. I like to humorously quip that, look at these two rapture positions. Pre-tribbers in the upper left corner have a pre-trib at the far left side of the 70th week of Daniel, the 7-year time frame, and then the post-tribbers have it at the far right. This tells you something at the very least. At face value, it tells you that both of them can't be right unless there's 2 raptures. And it also tells you that end-time prophecy is notoriously difficult to accurately understand, given the fact that we have whole diametrically opposing views that are out there, and both of them are using the same source material to come up with their they're models. In other words, they're both using the Bible. It's not like one group is using the Book of Mormon or the Quran or something like that, and another view is using the Bible. It's not like that. So, something we would expect. They're as if they were two separate religions. But both of these groups are championed. Both of these views are championed by people in Christian circles who are both well trained, well trusted, well respected, honest men, good men and women. And so it just blows my mind that we can have so many different opinions on the same topic coming from the same source. And yeah, all right, I guess I can shut down there. Anyway, the final view, the fourth view in the lower right corner, pre-wrath rapture, the one that I hold to, that this YouTuber, the one you're listening to right now, I hold to the pre-wrath rapture. And we're going to find out tonight just how similar and how different the mid-trib rapture is with the pre-trib rapture. In fact, some people who are mid-tribbers are in reality probably pre-wrathers in the way that they understand their model of end-time prophecy. And then some people who are truly pre-wrathers could better be called mid-tribbers in the way that they understand their theology, just depending on how you listen to them place the sequencing and the chronology of the events. But we're going to talk about mid-trib tonight. So what does pre-wrath believe? Pre-wrath raptures believe the rapture will occur. I'm reading this little thing right here. They believe that the rapture will occur, following the opening of the sixth seal of the book of Revelation, which is after the midpoint, by the way. The church will experience severe persecution by the Antichrist, but will be snatched away before God begins to pour out his wrath during the day of the Lord. So don't worry, we'll flesh some of this out as we go along. Okay, so where are we going tonight? As I mentioned, we're going to be using this resource from gotquestions.org. They are a Christian outfit, an apologetic, well, not necessarily, I guess they're apologetic, you could say that way. They answer thousands of Bible questions. Some of them are very surface level. Some of them are, they can get deeper if they dig in, but for the most part, they're meant to be more kind of encyclopedic, so not getting too much information on any one topic. So I'm using their resources to address this simple question. What are the strengths and weaknesses of any given position? Remember, we just showed 4. So we already looked at what are the strengths and weaknesses of the pre-trib. Now going in the order that I showed them to you on the screen just a moment ago, we're going to let them answer the question, what are the strengths and weaknesses of the mid-tribulational view of the rapture, or mid-tribulationism? After we take a look at gotquestions.org's short little essay, eventually we'll turn to, just like we did last time, we'll turn to my own pre-wrath answer or interaction with the gotquestions.org material, meaning since I'm not a mid-tribber, and just so you know, neither is gotquestions.org. They're not mid-trib either. They are, for now, pre-trib. But the two of us are going to provide our own commentary on the strengths and weaknesses of the mid-trib. But what I did is I interacted with the Got Questions material and showed where, as a pre-wrather, I believe the Got Questions essay kind of got it right in terms of what they're describing in mid-trib. In other words, I affirmed that there are some similarities between the pre-wrath and the mid-trib. Just like all the positions have similarities, but they all have differences, right? Strengths and weaknesses of each position. There are going to be some overlap between all the 4. Because of what I said earlier, we're all working from the same source material, which is the Bible. We're not jumping outside of the Bible to grab our major, what we might call authoritative perspective. We're not looking at extra biblical writings as authoritative, although they are informative. They sometimes give us confirmation of what the Bible says. However, gotquestions.org is going to try to show, they're going to keep trying to push for the pre-trib view, is my point, what I'm building up to here. Me being a pre-wrather, I'm going to show you where Got Questions got it right, I believe, in terms of mid-trib, and then where we pre-wrathers differ from the mid-trib as it was presented by Got Questions. In case you're confused, just follow along. It'll work itself out. All right. This, I'm going to scroll down and show you kind of in advance. There's only like 6 or 7 different paragraphs on this one. Last time there were 10. So I'm going to read down through this and stop and only expound as I go a little bit. We might not even go the full hour. I'm fine if we don't. I'm not ready to jump into my version yet. Let me see if I've even got it linked. Yeah, I didn't even link it, although I've got it written already, but I didn't think I'm going to get into it tonight. So let's just jump into gotquestions.org and work our way down to that, because I got to stop and explain along the way anyway, and it'll probably take a little bit of time to do that. Okay, so what's the answer? What are the strengths and weaknesses of the mid-trib view as seen through the eyes of a pre-tribber? Okay, this is gotquestions.org. They are pre-tribbers, which means they hold to this upper left corner version. And what I'm going to do this time is I'll work my way down through some of these slides so you can see them in more detail. Here's the pre-trib in front of you. Get that kind of snapshot in your mind for a moment. That Got Questions is a pre-trib outfit. They believe that the 70th week of Daniel, they're going to call it the 7-year tribulation. The 70th week of Daniel is this dispensational time frame that God has reserved for Israel. And that's why God calls it Jacob's trouble. That's according to a pre-trib / dispensational framework. Their hermeneutic believes that the entire 7 years does not involve the church. And so for that that's one of their primary reasons why the entire 7 years, the church has to be absent from it, either raptured prior to it or shows up later on at the very, very end. But either way, all of the events wrapped up in the 70th week, i.e., the presence of Antichrist, the tribulation, the great tribulation, the mark of the beast, all the seals in Revelation, all the bowls in Revelation, all the trumpets, all of those are for Israel and the world at large. The church is just absolutely excused from all of that based on their understanding of dispensationalism and based on some principles of verses that talk about how that God does not pour out wrath on his bride. He does absolutely pour out wrath on his enemies, and yet the church will suffer persecution from here and there and from time to time, but it's not to be equated with 7-year tribulation type of stuff. So that's their position. But they're going to be, GotQuestions.org is going to be critiquing the mid-trib rapture. So when we look at the mid-trib rapture, just to make sure we're following what this chart looks like, I'm showing all these charts so you can kind of get them in your head and memorize them, take snapshots of them with your eyes, because then I'm going to start reading the contents, the little essay that we have, and you're going to need to kind of refer back to this. So in the mid-tribulation rapture model, it's the same 7-year time frame, but one of the first things that you're going to see is that mid-tribbers break from the pre-tribbers and start moving away from this dispensational hard break between the church and Israel, because they allow the church to enter into the 7th week of Daniel, meaning at the very least they see that the church participates in what would otherwise be a heavily Jewish time frame. So the church is in the tribulation. They experience the first 3.5 years. Antichrist does sign a covenant, so the church meets the Antichrist in the mid-trib view. But then notice in this overly simplistic chart that you're looking at in front of you, the second half of the 70th week is where all the bad stuff comes down. God's wrath is poured out. There's the great tribulation, 3.5 years, the abomination of desolation being the midpoint between those two. And then we've got the popular second coming over on the far right. So what mid-tribbers do is they begin to challenge the pre-trib idea of the church being excused from any bad stuff. And they start to see some detail that I actually, as a PREWRATHer, commend them for. Number one, they start to challenge dispensationalism. Number two, they begin to realize that the 7th week of Daniel has these separators between some part that we could consider tribulation and some part that we consider God's wrath, versus, remember, in the pre-tribber view, God's wrath actually encompasses all of the 7 years to include tribulation on the front 3.5 years and great tribulation on the back 3.5 years. But when we get to mid-trib, they start to say, not all of it is God's wrath. The thing that is key to understanding why they place their rapture where they do, we're going to see it here when we get into it, but I'm kind of prepping you for it right now, in case you don't watch the entire video. What they decide in the mid-trib view is that when the rapture verses are taken at face value, because of the mention of the trumpet in the rapture, the classic rapture passages, you know them, right? 1 Corinthians 15, 53 and following, and 1 Thessalonians 4, 13 and following. Those are the classic rapture passages. What the mid-tribbers do is they look at the trumpet that Paul talked about, and Paul gave it that all famous, infamous label, the last trumpet. And because of that, the mid-tribbers do what the post-tribbers do, and they just assume and assert and interpret that the last trumpet must be the last trumpet, the seventh trumpet mentioned in the book of Revelation. Even though I, as a pre-wrather, don't take that view, but I could be wrong, right? It's not thus saith Ariel, it's thus saith the Lord. So I could be wrong, but mid-tribbers say it must be the seventh trumpet because that one's the last in a series. And therefore, from their perspective, the midpoint rapture takes place at that trumpet, and that trumpet must be during the seventh trumpet. And so they have the church basically going through the trumpet judgments only to be raptured at the seventh trumpet. That means they also go through the seven seals and things like that. And then God's wrath is poured out after that, meaning the bowls are God's wrath for the last 3.5 years, something like that. But let's let GotQuestions.org explain it to us. Okay, so the question is, what are the strengths and weaknesses of the mid-trib view of the rapture? Answer. Midtribulationism teaches that the rapture occurs at the midpoint of the tribulation. Thus, it's in their name, right? At that time, as I was mentioning earlier, the seventh trumpet sounds, Revelation 11:15. The church will meet Christ in the air, and then the bowl judgments are poured upon the earth, Revelation 15 through 16, in a time known as the Great Tribulation. In other words, and again, this is GotQuestions.org, who is pre-trib, explaining the mid-trib to those of you who might not know. GotQuestions continues. In other words, the rapture and Christ's second coming to set up his kingdom are separated by a period of 3.5 years. According to this view, the church goes through the first half of the tribulation, but is spared the worst of the tribulation in the last 3.5 years. Very close to mid-tribulationism is the belief in a pre-wrath rapture, i.e., a belief that the church is caught up to heaven before the great day of wrath comes, Revelation 6:17. I found it interesting that they mention pre-wrath rapture in an article on mid-tribulationism. And one reason that I find this interesting is because there are some in Christianity that have a view that is kind of a conflation of maybe two views. I've already mentioned in past that there's a view now that's very popular that is not quite post-trib and it's not quite pre-wrath. Rather, it shares features and details from both post-trib and pre-wrath, and so it's affectionately called post-trib pre-wrath or pre-wrath post-trib. I can't remember what name they give themselves. Joel Richardson makes mention of this in his commentaries and his YouTube videos, and he often talks about it, I think, as hybrid. I think he even favors that view, if I'm correct. So it's no surprise that there are those who hold a view that's mid-trib as far as the timing of the rapture, but as far as theology, it carries some overlap with pre-wrath. And so maybe we could call them mid-trib pre-wrath or something like that. In fact, let me just flash a chart in front of you. Let's see, is it one of my timeline charts? Yeah, it is. Give me a second. Hybrid. No, that's Joel Richardson's. What is it called? It's called it's called pre-wrath. It's an odd, there we go. Let me just flash this one in front of your screen for a second. Notice what you have in your screen. I think I'll open this. Give me a sec, because I might come back to it quite frequently. So this is a chart put together by a Christian group. and it is it's a outline of the 70th week of Daniel, similar to what I've been working with myself. Is it the one? Yeah. Okay. Notice, however, that in this view, that let me bring in my little, okay. Notice that all of it, as I can circle it, all of it is the 70th week of Daniel. And the way I know is because they say 3.5 years here, and then they say 3.5 years here, which means this point right here in the middle is the separator between the 3.5 and 3.5. But notice that here is when they have their rapture, their resurrection, which means on the one hand, I believe I'm looking at a mid-trib rapture. As far as sequencing, the rapture is in the middle of the tribulation, or the middle of the 7 years. Thus, this would kind of coincide with a mid-trib rapture. But when I listen, and also notice it's pre-wrath, right? So the rapture is here, the wrath is later, the rapture is after resurrection. Therefore, it's mid-trib, but it's pre-wrath. But when I listen to the pastor present this to his crowd there, in the video that I borrowed this graphic from, he didn't use the word mid-trib as far as his perspective. He kept saying, we're pre-wrath, this church believes in pre-wrath. He kept saying pre-wrath, which is what attracted, I think even the thumbnail and the name of the video is pre-wrath, rapture, blah, blah, blah. And in my research, I tried to understand what other pre-wrathers are teaching so I can kind of glean information, accept views that coincide or that line up with what I understand pre-wrath is teaching, and at the same time kind of sharpen my own perspective, and at the same time kind of reject things that go under the label of pre-wrath and yet differ from my own perspective. So I'm just trying to sharpen my view. You remember, pre-wrath is kind of the Johnny-come-lately. We haven't had all these centuries to develop our view. It's only been around since the 90s, since the fathers, Rosenthal and Van Kampen, kind of presented it to the world in the 90s. Well, this chart appears to me sequentially to be a mid-tribulational view because it's a rapture in the middle of a 7-year time frame. And yet, my point is that the pastor who presented this doesn't use the phrase mid-trib. He uses the phrase pre-wrath. And yet, when I look at this, I do not place the rapture in the middle of the 70th week like this chart does. But notice that this chart does place the rapture at the 7th trumpet, or after the 6th seal. I'm sorry, not right at the 7th trumpet. It places it right after the 6th seal. So it has features, this chart has features of the mid-trib, but it also has some of the features of the pre-wrath that I hold to. And so, in other words, just keep this in mind. We'll kind of come back to it. Let's go back to Got Questions. So that's why I found it interesting that they're mentioning also, in the middle of a mid-trib essay, they're also mentioning pre-wrath. Again, some people think they're the same thing. Some who are not mid-tribbers and are not pre-wrathers, they think, well, yeah, those are all the same thing. I get it. They've not studied out, and I'm not going to throw them under the bus for not studying it out. Okay, let's keep going. Talking from the perspective of Got Questions, who is a pre-trib outfit, they continue. In support of their view, mid-tribulationists point to the chronology given in 2 Thessalonians 2, 1 through 3. The order of events is as follows. Number 1, apostasy. Number 2, the revelation of the Antichrist. And 3, the day of Christ. The mid-trib view teaches that the Antichrist will not be decisively revealed until the abomination that causes desolation, Matthew 24:15, which occurs at the midpoint of the tribulation, Daniel 9:27. Mid-tribbers use Daniel 7:25, which says the Antichrist will have power over the saints for 3.5 years to bolster their point. They assume this is the first half of the tribulation and that the saints spoken are the church. They also interpret the day of Christ as the rapture. Therefore, the church will not be caught up to heaven until after the Antichrist is revealed. Once again, since this essay that we're reading is written from a non-mid-trib perspective, since it's written from the perspective of a pre-tribber who believes that the church will not face the Antichrist, that the church will not enter into the 7-year tribulation, aka the 7th week of Daniel. Since that's the case, we can now understand why God questions would say things like, they assume this is the first half, like this part right here. They assume this is the first half of the tribulation, and that the saints right there spoken of are the church, right? It's famously known, well, I know it, but I'm not sure if everyone always, I'm not sure if other people are considering it, but so when I say famously, it is to me, and it should be to most of you who study prophecy as well, but some people don't catch this fact. Pre-tribbers reject all of the discourse as referring to any rapture. So in Matthew chapter 24, a famous Olivet Discourse chapter, there are signs given as to preceding Christ's gathering, and then there are sequences and events that are spelled out for those who are going to be experiencing the gathering later on in this chapter. And even though when you read the chapter at face value, if you're uninformed, if you're not holding any position and you just didn't go to church, but you found a Bible and opened up and read it, even though the view that you would walk away with if you were in that position is that what is being described as the return of Christ, the parousia, is synonymous with the rapture. If that's, in other words, without some preacher coming along and telling you that this is not the rapture, I believe that if you read Matthew 24 at face value, that you would believe you're reading the rapture, which, by the way, is the view I hold to. I think it is rapture passage. But pre-tribbers say, no, the Olivet Discourse is not a rapture chapter. Instead, it's a second coming chapter, and the difference between the rapture and the second coming are many. They're two separate events. They are, one is secret, one is not. One is for the church, one is for someone else. So the saints spoken of are the church in the view of those who are not pre-trib. In other words, the mid-tribbers and the post-tribbers and the pre-raptures, the three of us, we team up against the pre-tribbers and say, you guys need to just read Matthew 24. You guys need to read the Olivet Discourse chapters, which are found in the three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. You guys need to read them more carefully and understand that this is the church that Jesus is talking to, not just the Jewish disciples or who would later just be unbelieving Israel when the time came. All right, so I had to bring that out. By the way, I'm going to touch on all that when I finally do my own quote-unquote refutation or answer. I'm going to, this video, the name of this video right now is, I haven't made the thumbnail yet, but it'll be something along the lines of strengths and weaknesses of the mid-trib rapture. It'll be something like that. But when I go to answer the claims that are being made by pre-trib's assessment of a mid-trib, then I'm going to rename the video. When I'm speaking, I want you to know that it's my thoughts. It'll be something like PREWRATH answers to mid-trib problems or something like that. So at that time, you'll get more of my perspective. Right now, I want to just give the microphone mainly to gotquestions.org and let them talk. They continue. Another foundational teaching of mid-tribulationism is that the trumpet of 1 Corinthians 15:52 is the same trumpet mentioned in Revelation 11:15. Remember, in case you didn't know, the pre-tribbers do not believe that the trumpet in the classic Rapture passages is referring to the seventh trumpet of the book of Revelation. They're going to talk about this here in a moment. But it's helpful to remember that the mid-tribbers and the post-tribbers do believe that the last trump that Paul talks about is synonymous with the seventh trumpet that John mentions in the book of Revelation. So it's only the pre-tribbers and the pre-raptors that reject the idea that the seventh trumpet, that the rapture trumpet and the seventh trumpet are the same trumpet. We pre-raptors also reject that idea. But this classic mid-tribber believes that it is. When I look at this chart, I'm not sure what to call these guys. Are they a modified midtrib? Are they a modified PREWRATH? It doesn't appear that they believe that the last trump and the seventh trumpet are the same thing. I just noticed they had like a silly typo, simultaneous judgments. But anyway, instead, some of what they have in this chart coincides and accords with what I believe is a PREWRATHer, and yet some of this coincides and accords with what I understand Midtrib to teach. So this is a kind of an odd beast. I don't know what to make of it, really. But I've got it there for reference. Let's keep reading gotquestions.org.